Hello and welcome. My name is Jose Arnulfo Cabrera, and thank you for joining us for our Self-Care for Activism live webinar. As always, I want to remind you all that if you have any questions or comments, you can drop them in during the live discussion, and we will be answering questions, like always, at the end of the broadcast. Before we get a little bit started, I wanted to share kind of a quick news that a breaking news that happened today. Today, the Trump administration released a memorandum that decided to make some changes to the current DACA program. Now, as you can remember, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of DACA, and then 2 or 3 weeks ago, forced the Trump administration to begin accepting new applications for DACA recipients. In short, what this new memorandum does is makes changes to the current DACA program. There are three main changes: are that if any new applications for DACA, new persons who've never had DACA and are applying to get DACA will be denied automatically. Secondly, advanced parole for DACA will not be issued to everyone and will be issued in a case by case and only be authorized to someone in very high case or extreme measures. And the last big change would be that DACA will go from being a once a month, 2-year program to a 1-year program, and after every 1 year, a DACA recipient will have to renew their DACA. So those are a little bit of the changes. Like I said, this memorandum came out today, maybe around 3 o'clock Eastern time, and so there's still a lot of things up in the air. There's still a lot of questions, still a lot of kind of prediction of how the administration will move forward, but I will keep you all informed, and you all staying in touch with our with ISN's social media and emails list. We will make sure that you are all informed and know what is happening with DACA. Well, without further ado, let's begin our program because I'm very, very excited about the next two folks that will be speaking to you all, talking about self-care for activism in a time when I think we all really, really need to remember and ground ourselves in taking care of ourselves, because this work, it is not a sprint, it is a marathon, and we need everyone to continue doing this great work. So first, I would like to introduce Dr. Cecilia Gonzalez. She teaches theology at Loyola University, or Loyola Marymount University, where she also works on multiple initiatives to serve Latinx community, especially the undocumented community. She is a contributing writer for America Magazine and publishes widely as a public theologian. She is a member of the board of directors at the Ignatian Solidarity Network, working to educate the community and empower youth to embody the faith that does justice. A respected international lecturer on issues of political theology, theological, aesthetics, and Latino theology. Thank you. And Latino theology. She is the author of a book called Bridge to Wonder. So if you please check out that book, highly recommend it. And Art as a Gospel of Beauty, co-editor of Teaching Global Theologians, Power and Proxies, and contributes to many publications, including Go Into the Streets, Welcoming Church of Pope Francis. So welcome, Dr. Cecilia. I'm very excited to have you. And I'm also going to welcome Dr. Kristen Linden. She is the Director of Psychology Service at Loyola Marymount University. Dr. Linden has been a psychologist for over 30 years and has the privilege of working with at-risk youth in juvenile hall, children and families in community mental health, infants through adult special needs populations, and currently provides therapy for students at LMU. Dr. Linden is an LMU Lion fan. She is a Nation colleague, cohort of two, enjoys uh, enjoys gardening, reading, and the arts, and spending time with her family and friends. So, welcome you two. Thank you for spending time with us and talking about this very important subject that I think a lot of
Did you just freeze?
So we're gonna start with having a doctor. We're gonna now have Dr. Cecilia start us off with. So Dr. Cecilia,
Sure. Thank you, Jose. And thank you, everyone, for being here with us, for making time for this. So I am a professor at LMU, and part of the privilege of that is to have these deep and difficult conversations often with my students, undergraduates, graduate students, also having these conversations with some of the members of our worker community, with students who are in mixed status families. And most of the time when I have these conversations, which is why I've titled this What Goes Unsaid, Straight Talk for and by Immigrants, we are talking about things that most of the time we don't talk about. We don't talk about them in public, and we don't even talk about them with each other. And part of my own work is to build the trust between students and myself, or myself with some of our custodians and groundskeepers and other immigrant members of the LMU community, to begin having these difficult conversations. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today is kind of taboo in immigrant communities. I can speak, of course, from the Latinx perspective, but I hear from a lot of my colleagues who are part of Asian communities and Muslim communities and Indian communities, that a lot of these same kinds of issues are there, and that they have difficulty also talking through these issues. So I want to start by talking about the idea of accompaniment that comes out of Ignatian spirituality and out of the Ignatian mission, right? So Father Pedro Arrupe, who, if you're in any kind of a Jesuit setting, you've gotten to know his name. He really is kind of the second founder of the Jesuits. And he talked about being men and women for others. And so that's something that most of our universities have as a core of our identity and of our mission. Father Greg Boyle, who probably many of you know as the leader who began the amazing work of Homeboy Industries, and who wrote the incredible book, Tattoos on the Heart, he added something to that. He said, we need to be women and men, not only for others, but with them, right? He wanted us to have the idea that we are together, that we walk together, what we call acompañamiento, accompaniment. So in order for us to be able to do this kind of accompaniment, to walk with, right, we need to really have a sense, an empathic sense, right? A sense of who is it that we are walking with, and what kind of burdens are they carrying. And as I said, these are conversations that many of us are very reluctant to have, even with each other. and certainly with someone who's outside of our communities. So we're going to have some frank conversation. Some of it may even feel a little bit uncomfortable, but I also know that when I have these conversations with my students or my coworkers, that a burden seems to be lifted, because now we know I'm not the only one that feels this or thinks this, but I share this with others. So I'm going to go through a set of 6 points of things that we don't talk about and that we kind of keep under a bushel, but that we need to just bring out into the light. Okay, so let's get to number 1. Number 1 is the entire way that we are forced into an identity. We're not allowed to define ourselves or who we are. We're given an identity. The identity may be alien, refugee, immigrant, or it may be really insulting and awful, like being called illegal. Now, what does this do? First of all, it doesn't allow us to name ourselves. It objectifies us, but also it's always the first step that autocratic leaders take in dehumanizing a population so that they can commit atrocities against them. So the Trump administration, from the moment it took power, started using this kind of really dehumanizing language, calling immigrants, we've heard all the things, right? Rapists and all kinds of things, but really, really stretching the limits of what has ever been the kind of language that has ever been used. So we need to know that we don't need to be defined by that kind of language, but that we can claim the language of our tradition and say all humans are made in the image of God, and we are simply human beings, exactly as every other human being, with the same rights and the same dignity as every other human being. So that's number 1. Let's go to number 2. Number 2 is the idea of internalized racism. And that means that when you live in a racist society that uses this kind of language, that has these kinds of systems, you start to internalize it, you start to believe it. And it becomes part of how you function in the world, because you know no other world. So often I have conversations with some of my coworkers who may have had to cross the border in very difficult circumstances. And sometimes they have a sense of guilt about that, saying, well, maybe I don't deserve anything because I did something wrong. And when we go deeper and I ask the questions, well, why did you cross that border? And we get to the fact that your family was starving, you needed safety, your children were in danger. When we come to that, we realize, oh, it's the opposite of you being somebody who should be shunned or blamed. It's the opposite. You're someone who should be admired for your courage, for your strength, and for your selflessness in trying to save your family, right? The other thing that happens within our communities is that we have internalized the power of whiteness. And so we have within our communities levels of whiteness, right? And we know that the more you can pass as white, the more chances you have of making it in the society. And sometimes the less you can, the less that you feel. And so we have even internalized that kind of color coding within our own communities. And we need to really resist that, to question the racism that has filtered inside of us, and then to get rid of it and to talk about it. So let's move on to number 3. Number 3 is the imposter syndrome. Now, I admit I felt this when I first got to LMU, and I really felt it when I started my PhD program up at the Graduate Theological Union and at UC Berkeley. And that is, somebody made a mistake letting me in here. I'm not prepared for this. I don't normally get these kinds of chances. I don't normally get to be in these kinds of spaces. Somebody's going to find out that I shouldn't have this presidential scholarship, or that I'm sitting in a classroom where we're studying Western art history in a PhD program, and everybody's talking about their experiences at the Louvre and at El Prado and at the Church of Notre Dame in Paris and all this. And here I am doing a PhD, and I have never been to any of those places ever, right? And my family was too poor for that. So that makes me feel like an imposter, like I don't have a place in this space. Again, we have to turn that on its head and say, actually, the fact that you're here without all those advantages, the fact that you're here without all those connections, wow, that says a lot about you. Or as one of my friends likes to say, you're doing it in high heels and backwards, right? You're doing multiple ways what others are doing. So give yourself credit. Don't feel like an imposter, but say, actually, I do twice the work, and I'm pretty proud of that. Let's go to number 4. Number 4 is survivor syndrome. Now, this one is really painful. It feels like a thorn inside of our hearts. And that's the idea that when we do get to these places where we have some sort of privilege, where we get to sit in a library and study, be in a classroom, even be in a dorm room with a beautiful view and clean air, I kept thinking and crying about the fact that I knew my abuela was home in the room that she and I had shared as I was growing up. And outside of her window, my window then, was a body shop, toxic and awful and smelly and noisy. And here I was in my dorm room at LMU with this beautiful ocean breeze and trees. And I felt so guilty. It felt so wrong for me to even take this space, because I was the survivor and the rest of my family was struggling, right? That's a really painful thing to feel. And it gets bigger because the more we learn, the more we are prepared in critical thought, the more advantages our education continues to give to us, the further we feel we're being pulled from our communities. But it was my very abuela who got me over this by centering me on the idea of being called and of being given gifts by God that God expected me to use. So she said, I want you to think that when you're at the university, not only are you going to do things that will better the life of your family, but you will do things that will better the life of your community and that will better the world. God has given you gifts. God needs you to use them, and you should never feel guilty for the time that you're taking to prepare. And so, again, it takes some tweaking for us to get ourselves into this mindset. And sometimes we may even have to tell people, I'm sorry that you think I'm having like a super easy life away in college, but actually I'm not. I'm doing some really hard work, and I'm doing it because I want to change the systems that hurt my community and that hurt the world. Okay, let's go to number 5. Number 5 is this idea that immigrants and vulnerable people are always faced with everyday issues, right? What we call lo cotidiano, that come at you. They come at you and you can't choose, right? You don't have choices about them. They just happen to you in many ways. So today, for instance, when we got the news about DACA, it just felt like, what just happened? That was angry making. But at the same time, those moments have the potential to reveal something really beautiful, right? And so immediately, right, we were on the text with all of our student community, and we were in solidarity with each other, and we were caring about each other, and we were sending emails to our administration, and we were strategizing, and we were thinking, okay, how are we going to pay for the fees and all this, right? It brings up something really beautiful, okay? So even if it wounds us, if reality doesn't give us a choice and it wounds us, it can also reveal, right, something profoundly good and beautiful in revealing solidarity, in revealing care for each other, in revealing selflessness, right? And we're seeing that right now with the pandemic. We're seeing many acts of great beauty coming from people who choose then to take something they have no choice over and to approach it in the very right way, in solidarity with each other. Okay, so let's go to number 6. And number 6 is the one that's really going to lead us into what my wonderful colleague, Dr. Linden's going to talk about. And that's that we have to take care of ourselves before we can take care of others. And this is where most of my conversations with my students and my coworkers always end up. When I ask them, how are you taking care of yourself? Very often, especially in communities of color, this isn't something we ask. As a matter of fact, we're very often kind of shamed to think we would take care of ourselves, right? Because we're just so used to taking care of others. Or to use an image from the gospel, right? We're used to washing other people's feet. And we're really good at that. But wow, we actually need to have our feet washed. And we need to give space and time for someone else to wash our feet and to care for us. So my little shorthand to remember that you need to do this is those videos that are on airplanes, when we used to be on airplanes, where they would, you'd have this little video that would get you ready for your flight. And one of the things they would say is, make sure that you put your mask on first in case of emergency, get the oxygen flowing, and then help the person who's with you. Put it on first, then help the person who's with you. We don't do that, we pass out. So what I want you to think about is that every time that you take care of yourself and that you do things to get oxygen into you, you're doing them because you want to help the person next to you. And if you are passed out from exhaustion, if you're burnt out from just too much on you, you're not going to be able to help, right? So this is as Jose knows so well, and he said, this is a marathon. This isn't a sprint. So we need you to get that mask on, breathe deep, and then take care of yourself, because we rely on you to take care of others. And with that, let's go to Dr. Linden, I think.
Thank you both for, thank you, Dr. Cecilia, for that.
I'm ready.
I would, and I just want to quickly add that it almost feels as if you were in my head, kind of, mentioning all that. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Linden, so she can start sharing her knowledge and expertise.
Thank you. Cecilia has really prepared this very well. In fact, we could have written this together because she did a great job of setting me up. So thank you, Cecilia. So one of the things she said about taking care is what I'm going to speak to you all tonight. And thank you for having me. So how do we create space for care during troubled times? Part of, you can go next. When we talk about cura personalis, we're talking about taking care of the whole person. But what Cecilia was also mentioning is, how do we take care of you? How do we take care of all of you? Next. So we can keep going. Thank you. I want to just outline some purposes. We're going to, I conceptualize this around stress and trauma. And what we're looking at, when Cecilia said your throne things, the contadina, I can't, what that is sometimes we have stress that we handle or that we get rest from, and then we have trauma that accumulates. And I want us to prevent trauma, and that's part of how we take care. one of the other parts of taking care is not just to limit ourselves by what some of our challenges are, but what our strengths are. And Cecilia did a beautiful job of also talking about the collective ability, which really is part of healing. Part of caring and is to honor ourselves, honor our culture, honor our roots, and honor others. And that is really an important part of how we take care. I'm going to talk a little bit about creating space for care and then a plan for self-care. So the next slide talks about stress. Stress is a natural response to our, you can move forward. Go ahead, Jose. You can just kind of move it and I'll just go back. You can tell Cecilia's a teacher because she doesn't need prompts. So stress is a natural reaction to a life experience, and sometimes stress can be really, we're excited, we're going to go to college, or we're getting married, or we're having a vacation, and those are very natural stresses. It can be temporary or it can be cumulative. And there are many types of stress, but one of them is how we carry it in our body. There's a physical stress. Sometimes we go, I have a headache. My stomach hurts, my back hurts, or like many people who do labor, they carry a lot of pain in their body. There's also psychological and emotional stress, and that's often where people really come to therapy. And I want to talk a little bit about when it might be a good idea to do therapy. There is psychosocial stress, and this is what DACA is. We're in an environment where we are attacked by social injustice forces, and our perception of ourselves, our identity is under attack. There is a psychospiritual, and that is a crisis of meaning. And I think Cecilia did a great job of just the imposter syndrome, the survivor syndrome, the meaning of life. Those are things that are all affected. The next slide, Jose, is about trauma. And I love this quote by Alice Walker, who is talking about it is natural to want to have a future. So when Cecilia was talking about coming from her home to a university, she had a goal, she had a dream. That is natural to want something for ourselves, for things that we want to accomplish in life. So what is trauma? So trauma can be individual, it can be collective, and it can be generational. Trauma is something that happens to us that we aren't able to assimilate in our own self, and it is something that affects us beyond our ability to cope with. So we want to look at stress before we get to trauma, but we do want to recognize when we might be stuck in a very difficult place. So when we're talking about, and Cecilia also talked about this with the imposter syndrome, if you have a gift, you deserve to use it. And I think Cecilia used her example of going to the university. She had a gift and she used it. She deserves that. You deserve to be deeply longed for. You deserve to be belonging. And unfortunately, our government is not doing a good job of showing us that. So you can do the next slide, Jose, and you can just go all the way through that one slide. So this is saying there's no wrong way to feel. And one of the things we get in with all of us, but often with DACA's people, is that they don't feel that they deserve to be angry or sad, because in some positions they're having a better life than their abuelo that Cecilia was talking about. But feelings are really, really important to honor, both as a flag for how we want to express our feelings or to understand what is going on, and they should not be denied. And so the next, well, I want to organize this around how I think of therapy in a way that talks about the brain, which is a part of our flow of energy, and our experience, which is how we develop our mind and how we experience the world that brings us into how we are often in conflict with how people see us. So we have an identity that sometimes people are judging, and I wanted just to say that it's not you that are broken, it is the way the world judges and the world perceives many people. So you are valid, you deserve to be here, and feelings are warranted, as is your work. So when we look at Cecilia also talked about internalized racism, and I think that's really an important concept to hold, because we often internalize things without evaluating them, and we believe them in a way that is artificial and not true. So part of Cecilia's thoughts about speaking is that when we articulate something, especially to another, whether it is a professor, a psychologist, to a kind and compassionate other, it brings out a reality that we can examine, that we don't have to stay in the sense of imposter or in sense of I don't belong here. The next slide talks about responses to stress and trauma. And one of the things that we can talk about stress. So if you're a student, you can get stressed for an exam, right? And that's good because we want you to study, because we want you to get good grades. But if we have too much stress, which I think Cecilia and Jose, when we were meeting prior to this, they were talking about being very engaged in planning for this next move that Trump has done. So they weren't necessarily prepared for it. And if we continue to have things thrown at us, stress accumulates in a way that leads to psychological or emotional stress. So remember, trauma can be, stress is more, state and trait. We all have stress. We can all feel sad. We can all feel happy. But when it becomes a state, which trauma can be, we really are trapped in not being able to sleep, not being able to concentrate. And let me just say that there are other diagnoses that these can fall under, but trauma, we're hyper alert. And I'm thinking of Black Lives Matter and George Floyd, how that knee on the neck has probably created such trauma for people who are afraid of police or driving brown and black, right? Because you have to be alert, you have to be aware of your environment, which many white people don't give a second thought about going in their car and passing up police. So why is it important to know this is because we want strategies to deal with stress. And part of that is self-care. I mentioned in a previous slide, and Jose, that's why we can stay right there, is that there's individual, collective, and generational trauma. And so individual trauma could be that a 17-year-old or someone who was thinking of applying, well, a thing that comes to mind is a rape. So rape would be an individual trauma. Certainly crossing the border might be individual trauma, but it also might be collective. You're going to join a group of people who also are immigrating. And how does the intergenerational trauma work? Is that one, there is some idea that the brain is very plastic, but it changes. It changes things when we have too much adrenaline, when we have too much emotional arousal. And then that can be transferred not only genetically in some measure, but also how we speak to our children about watch out for the police, or how we have to protect our family from forces that could happen to us. And that creates a steady state of hyperarousal or poor concentration, depression, can't sleep, things like that. But there's also inherited strength. And I wanted just to articulate or reinforce what Cecilia said about if you can identify with your roots, with your culture, with their art, with their music, with their generosity, with their religion, that is a way to really help yourself with healing and strength. And we'll speak a little bit more about that with regards to collective healing. So this is a quote by Audre Lorde, who was a feminist in the early 1900s. She was a civil rights activist around LGBT issues and around minority. And she wrote that, and the next little slide here, it says, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. So it's really important and powerful. And Cecilia used the analogy of oxygen. Think of self-care as oxygen to recuperate so that you can engage in warfare. It is essential. So the next slide talks about, but it's so hard. So we hear this in therapy. I think Cecilia mentioned it. It's hard when people are judged, called names, demeaned out of their ethnicity. So it's hard to say I'm important. It's hard to say I deserve to have something, even though our heart and our soul will say, well, I think I'm supposed to have this. So trauma can make us, and stress can make us forget who we are. It can make us lose touch with the meaning of life. That would be a spiritual crisis, or with our family, with our roots. So starting with who you are and how you identify is really, really important to honor your strengths. And then I just put that you're worthy of love. You need to celebrate who you are and to celebrate each other. When we have hopes and dreams, they sometimes are accompanied by disappointment and anger and frustration, and all of those also have to be identified, because unless you face something, you can't change it. So I'm paraphrasing James Baldwin, but we can change things, and I'm just dealing with the individual. Obviously, we hope we can make the world change in some areas too. The next quote is talking about how I'm going to move into collective healing. Not everyone needs therapy. Some people can really do great work around what Cecilia said about having conversations, identifying the unspoken. Those are healing moments. So in moments of grief, in crisis, of trauma, and in the time before and after, we need each other to survive and thrive. The next slide is to talk about healing collectively, and I love this quote. Ida Wells Barnett was an early feminist, and she was, I don't think she called herself a feminist, but she was one of the co-founders of the National Association for Advancement of Colored People. She was a leader in civil rights, and she was a journalist. And she said, the way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them. And I think that's what your work is doing as an activist and as a therapist. Also, we want to shine the truth of ourselves and honor our strengths that we have. So although we don't know what will happen now or in the future, collectively, how do we heal? So Cecilia had a great example today of saying, oh my gosh, they got hit by this news, but she used a beautiful term that beauty was revealed. And as a psychologist, we sometimes talk about reframing, which is not as nice as beauty revealed. But yeah, we have to find the beauty sometimes where we find it. And she was finding it in her colleagues with the sense of solidarity, with the ability to say, well, we're not giving up hope. And collectively, if we can feel hope with each other, that's a very powerful thing of healing, not to be alone. Share your story. What does that mean again? Honor your truth. Say what you feel. Have a way of honoring and looking at life in a way that says that I deserve to be here. How can I move forward? Create a support system. That is so important. And the support system should also be shared for fun. And I think Cecilia also said, sometimes we just have to always work because there's so much to do. But no, remember the oxygen. You have to sit down, have a meal, chill with a good movie, take a walk, look for flowers, It's really very important. Honor your values, your faith. Obviously, we have crises of faith, but when we search for meaning, we want to connect and be congruent with what we believe. And that also to accept help when you need therapy. So I'm going to go into individual self-care and a little bit, if no one has been to a therapist, sometimes we just go for 1 or 2 times. We get a check-in. We have a sort of a problem that we want a different voice to look at. We don't necessarily give advice, but we help organize and find meaning. Grief over death would be one of them. That's a normal response, and some people get stuck in grief, and we want to get them unstuck. Other people remember that psychological, emotional piece. Sometimes we get so depressed that we can't get out of bed, we're not eating, we're not sleeping, and you're not going to be a very effective activist. And also your body and your heart are hurting, so you need to have someone help you through those times. And that is also a good time to see a therapist. Around crisis of meaning, there are spiritual advisors, and those are people too that are being helpful. So if we can go to the next slide, we're looking at caring collectively, and I think I've gone through these points a little bit, so real quickly, to reconnect to ourself, our identities. There's an intersection of many identities. Honor the strengths, and certainly we all have to work on our challenges. To feel alive in our body is to be rested, to go out dancing or to go out walking, and we want to really know our body. You know, many people don't pay attention to just living in their body. Refuel and persist. Again, we can't, if we're on that airplane, we don't take that oxygen, we're going to have a hard time persisting. And oxygen is a great metaphor for in life. You know, we take in life with oxygen. It is life-giving. So refuel. Increased resiliency is part of how we care for ourselves. It can make us feel hopeful. It makes us feel like we can bounce at least back or get up when we don't feel like getting up. It improves overall health and well-being, and it affirms that we are deeply matter. The next slide is a little bit like the oxygen for on the plane, because really you can't pour from an empty cup. The idea is that if we don't breathe, if we don't replenish our heart or our soul or our bodies, we're going to not be able to pour from our cup. So how do we do that? There's the wellness wheel, but I'm not going to go through that. I want to just speak to, this was often on the next slide. I say thank you. I'm not sure how to care for myself. One of the threads on the Black Lives Matter was, I'm so tired. You know, I imagine you're also tired. You've been working hard. We've been having 3 years of having a very tough president who is trying to defeat many human interest initiatives, including DACA. So one of the first things it's okay not to know, and when we're talking about stress, and I talked about the body, you can go, I'm so tired. Well, that should be a symptom that you need to rest. So part of not knowing is those flags of not concentrating, I'm not eating right, or I'm eating too much, or I'm drinking too much, or some people use drugs. So the idea is, where has your life gone off a little kilter, and how can we start to bring it back? So start where you are. You're not exercising, so maybe you walk around the block. Take it a day, an hour, a minute at a time. This is sort of one of the AA interventions, which I kind of like. This AA is about, as you know, for drinking, and many alcoholics feel they can't give up alcohol for the rest of their life. So imagine giving up anything for their life. So the thing is, well, how can you get through the next hour, or how can you get through the day? And most of us can find a way to get through that moment if we have an opportunity for support or have some other plans to help us make it. It's not just getting through. It's learning a new lifestyle. What are you already doing? Are you checking in with your family or your partner? Are you spending some alone time, which sometimes we all need? And what's the next thing you need to do? What is the thing that says, like at work, I'm a person that I have that hangry when, if I don't eat, I get a little irritable, and Angie, my admin, will go, Kristen, have you eaten? Because she knows that I'm a much easier person to be around if I have a little food in my stomach. But that's a flag, that's something that I need to remember. And then lastly, really be kind to yourself. What does that mean? We try to teach self-compassion. It's kind of ironic that we have to teach it, but one of the things is like, I don't deserve to be here. I shouldn't be here. And the question is, how would you say that to a friend? How would you answer that? And like Cecilia said, well, when you think about why you came, what you were doing for your family back home, that's a compassionate response that helps that person have self-compassion. So self-critical remarks need to be examined. Sometimes, we need to be critical. We need to take responsibility. But more often, we need to be kinder. And if we're kinder to ourselves, that helps lift the burden of having to work very hard for things that you're working for. And then lastly, there are some self-care ideas on the next slide. Thank you, Jose, is unpack your feelings. So I think it's really important that we can have a place to vent, but then also, what do those feelings represent? And in therapy, we sometimes want to go, what's underneath that feeling? So sometimes the anger, the sadness is just that I don't feel like I belong here. I don't feel like I deserve. And then we have an opportunity for that feeling not to be stuck in just a sadness or disappointment, but we can challenge the belief around it. So unpack your feelings, angry, sad, happy. Those are very good. I'm sure you've heard this before, unplug from social media. We all spend too much time on the computer now that we're in COVID. So unplug. Take a walk, read a book, look at the flowers, go to the beach if you're close to the mountains, find some place in nature, read, pray. I want to just talk a little bit about meditation. So mindfulness is a very huge movement, not only in psychology, but also in religious practices have been around for a while that have been doing this. So mindfulness is important, and if we can focus sometimes just on a present project, a present moment, it kind of reduces the chatter in our head. Does that make sense? So some people do prayer beads, some people do the rosary, some people do a meditation around breathing and just focus on breath, because we want to give our brain a little rest from all the noise. We want to give our brain a rest from wanting to solve a problem or to not worry about some of the things that COVID is providing us. So mindfulness is a very instrumental intervention. Maintain healthy relationships where you can communicate. So we can have friends that we like to play cards with, where we want to go shopping with, we want to have a meal with, but there has to be hopefully some place where you can feel connected to share really important feelings. And I think often young people, because of the Twitter, or because they feel like they don't deserve to share feelings, this is an opportunity where you want to get close emotionally with people you trust around things that you're feeling and thinking. Care for your basic needs. Cecilia mentioned some of that. So eat, sleep. Sleep is so important. Clean your space. I think for some of us who are over compulsive about cleanliness, that's not what I mean. I just mean, like, sometimes if we can have the control over our room, we can feel like, okay, I have something in place, and that gives a sense of having some care for how you want to live in a room. And Cecilia also mentioned this. Sometimes we want a hug, or we want, of course, in COVID, we want to keep 6 feet apart, except for family members. But yeah, let someone know you want someone to cook dinner for you, and you'll cook for them, or give you a foot rub or a hug. One is the physical contact is really helpful, but also it's nice to be taken care of, just like you take care of other people. Connect and talk with loved ones. We talked about that. Be kind to yourself. Again, I can't say that enough. And say no. And this is going to be a hard one for you guys. So say no is when you realize your body's tired, even though there's work to do. Say no when your best friend says, let's watch a movie. You have to say, no, I need a quiet time. Say no if there's an opportunity that you really don't feel you can do today, but you can put it off till tomorrow. And putting boundaries around people who are toxic is really important as well. And that is my self-care for you. And so I want to say thank you for your time. And I think Cecilia and I are ready for questions.
Thank you both. Thank you both so much for all of that. I want to apologize for all of those, for those at Hope who noticed the technical difficulties. It's the
I'm not hearing you.
About now.
Oh.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. The technical difficulties continue. I love it. Well, I want to just remind folks that if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat box. There's just so much that you guys talked about that as I was taking that in, I reflected on a lot of advice that I need to continue to create and keep developing as someone who does this work for a living. And also when I close my laptop and are off my office hours, I still have to deal with the immigration problem because it's part of my everyday. And so thank you for all that. Thank you for helping that. And I hope for those of you who are watching, you were able to take a lot of that experience and be able to find ways to apply it. So we do have one question. First off, Miguel said, thank you so much, both of you, for all of this. How do you employ some of these things you talked about into your own activism?
You talking about self-care, or you talking about?
I would say everything. The self-care portion, and both of everything that you spoke about. We both spoke about.
Well, I'm going to say that everything is a practice. There is not a. So I think part of not knowing, but you can start with one thing that says, I have headaches. And why do you have headaches? Well, maybe you need to drink water. Or I'm tired all the time. Well, then we can work on a sleep program. So starting simple. I do think connecting to people is so important, and getting support, especially in the line of work that you're doing. So I think that is also an intervention. Cecilia?
Well, yeah, in my own activism, there's a couple of things. One is that you choose your battles. I choose my battles. So like today, I walked away from a project that I thought, hey, this is not making a difference in the world. They just want my name on it. I'm done with it, right? And I wrote a letter and said, I'm done. And sometimes you got to pick the battles and put all your energy into the stuff that's really going to make a difference. So for me, that's the thing that I do. The other thing is, in my activism, I've always tried to really be awake and aware of where my team is, right? So how are my students feeling? How are they carrying things? Do we need to have some hard conversations about these kinds of things that nobody dares talk about? So just being like totally very open and accessible. And, you know, my undocumented students will tell you they all have my cell phone number and they text me if something is like really not going well at all for them, and we just need a little bit of time to talk. Having that be part of my activism, it means that it's close to me. And a lot of people think, well, you know, I want to be an activist and I want to change the world. I want to go to Africa and do it, or I want to do this or that. And I always remind people, you can do some really great social justice work just around you. Look at the people around you. They need, see how you can help them and carry some of the burden with them. And there's a lot of change you can make just like right here, right now, to those that are close.
Oh, thank you. Here's another question which I really felt this question. What are some coping mechanisms for when you're a large social justice issue such as immigration leads you feeling overwhelmed or hopeless?
Well, for me, you know, I remember asking this of one of my own teachers when I was like in my 20s, and I looked over at him and I said, "You've been doing this your whole life. How are you not tired?" And he said, "Because I am preparing you." Okay? So I think that we have to have a long view. When it feels like really gigantic and really big, to say, well, I may not see the results, and you know, Dr. Martin Luther King said that, right? I may not get there with you, but I'm gonna lay whatever the seeds are that may make this happen, right? And so my teachers prepared me to keep going. I'm preparing my students to keep going, and looking at that beautiful chain, I think gets us away from the idea that we need immediate results, and that we're preparing a future, and we need to be committed to that future.
So I think I'm going to talk about it individually. So for me, and when I'm thinking of being overwhelmed, I have to break things down. And I think Cecilia gave an example of how she's cutting things out of her life. You mentioned someone who asked something from you. So being overwhelmed also means I know what my resources are and what I can do right now. And often we look too far into the future. Again, Cecilia was talking about laying the groundwork, but part of it is to be aware of what I can do right now and be effective, and what I can't do right now, and how I have to lay down something that I can't do. So sometimes activists are going to school and they have to study for an exam, so they can't get out the vote, for example. So prioritizing for yourself, and I'm talking about self-care, sometimes means just that you're not going to be as effective if you're going to flunk out of school or you're feeling bad about yourself. Again, I'm going to talk about get through the minute, get through the hour. Sometimes I can get through this one section, but I have to really just focus on the hour. Those small steps and then the future, but focusing too much on the future can feel too undoable.
Yeah. Here's another question. How do you encourage someone that you feel needs to employ some self-care into their lives?
I'll start with that. Well, first of all, you have to ask, as a therapist maybe, but why do you feel you can't do it? I mean, what is so difficult about self-care? And so most people say I'm too busy, right? Or I have too much to do. And obviously, many people have a very full plate. So then what does it take away from your life? How does it impact you, not only individually, but socially and emotionally? So I could say, lay the foundation for what it hinders yourself, but also how it impacts you in relation to what you want to accomplish. I think sometimes people need permission, and Cecilia, you also spoke to this. The permission, it is okay to not get up Saturday morning and sleep in, even though you know that you're going to get up and have work to do. So giving yourself permission, then evaluating what you accomplish when you do give yourself self-care. How does it feel when you give someone a hug? How does it feel when someone makes you breakfast? Does that make you feel like, okay, I'm more energized, so I can do more? And I think people forget that. They feel like it's an indulgence. They feel like, oh, well, if I sit down for an hour, that means that I'll look lazy. Versus, no, this is an act of self-preservation, so I can continue the warfare.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, especially for communities of color, we need to bring out in the open and talk about all of the scripts for not caring for yourself. It's really important to say, are you feeling guilty about it? Are you feeling wrong about it? What what is standing in the way of this? And let's examine that. What kind of scripts did you get at home? I mean, at least in my house, it's like, are you kidding? Psychological care? No, that's not something strong people do. You just tough it out. You keep going. Well, no. I tell my students, no, nobody should ever have to do that, right? But that's what our familias tell us often. So we have to be able to say, I got some not so great mental health advice from my familia, and I'm going to examine that, and then I'm going to maybe change that. And at some point, I may be able to help them, but that's not my goal. My goal is to be able to get myself healthy and to get rid of these kinds of guilt and to be able to do the right thing, because there's a lot of good and beautiful in the world that needs me, and I need to be ready for that.
So if I may just say that the weakness, right, I think that is a generational value that continues to stress people, right? Because if to be strong means you do it on your own, or that you don't admit a feeling of sadness or being frustrated, or I don't know what I'm going to do, then it doesn't allow you to overcome it. So yeah, that's a great example of a generational value that we hold on to as if, well, I can't possibly ask for help. I can't ask for a hug. I can't take time for myself.
This question, I feel you all touch a little bit of base upon, but I think it would still be good to ask. So just we kind of re-identify them. But how do you suggest how do you suggest avoiding and combating burnout for activisms that always feel like there is so much more work to be done?
For me, and again, I'm going to look to Dr. King or to the beautiful John Lewis that we just recently lost, of saying, keep your eyes on the prize. For me, having that ultimate goal very clear is what keeps me from burning out. So for me, as a Catholic Christian and as a theologian, that's my vision that I share of what the gospel communicates as the kingdom of God, a place where there's no longer sadness, where there's no war, where there's no hunger, a world that really conforms to God's vision of beauty. So that's my goal. And it's always out there, like, it's kind of like, hey, that's the North Pole. I'm always heading there. And then I can discern, does this work toward that or does it not? Does it advance the work of the kingdom of God, or does it not? And keeping just that frame helps me first say no to things that just are not going to create that beautiful world that I want, and also gives me the strength to sometimes resist what will destroy that world, sometimes propose what will build that world, support, nurture, all those things, right? But I always have a very clear vision of what that world looks like. And I think, at least for me, using my imagination, right? I wrote work on theological aesthetics, meaning, on everything that has to do with our senses and with beauty. Using my imagination to imagine that world just keeps me going.
So I think burnout is a symptom. And I think Cecilia is talking about, I think, how she's very congruent with her whole life, right? She has prepared to be a theologian. She is passionate about social activism. And I would hope there is some balance in her personal life to help keep that afloat. So the idea of burnout, again, as a symptom, it says, well, there's a fatigue. It's sort of like the metal that you kind of work and it breaks because it has reached a place that it's fatigued. And again, I would question then, how are you filling yourself up? And the question suggests that there is too much to do, because there is so much to do. And part of finding meaning in work is to see the success in the small steps, that you are laying a foundation to build on. I often reflect, I was a young psychologist. I worked with very intellectually challenged young people, and there was a little boy, profoundly a low IQ, and part of he was a syndrome child, and we taught sign language. And for children who are disabled to have self-care needs taken care of independently is a great relief as they get older, right? Because then they fulfill a function that someone, and it took 2 years to have him sign cup and toilet. But it was a huge accomplishment. And part of why I'm using this story is that it took intensive work over 2 years, but then you look back and what a great difference that made. And so I would like to say to the questioner is to sort of appreciate the value that he's contributing or she's contributing, to take a scan and contemplate, take a reflection of where the burnout is, and then look at what it means in terms of your own care and moving forward.
Yeah. Thank you both so much. This is a very important topic that I think everyone, every activist, every single person needs to all spend time. And as you all talked about, putting the work and time into developing those coping mechanisms, whatever that may be, whether it's imagining, achieving the goal, keeping in mind that goal, which I use that is because that's actually what is very relevant for me since I was a little kid, and even to the point of imagining where you picture the color of objects, the color of the clothes you're wearing, spend so much time in that, which helping you with burnout. And I also think it's just you're feeling very stressed. I think I've told other folks that is also work. Taking care of yourself is, if you are so stressed about feeling like you're not putting in work, then see as the self-care part of your work.
Right.
But it's more of investing in yourself, because like I tell folks, this is a marathon and we need everyone, because there are people right now in power that are making it very impossible for us to continue to just exist here and live here,
Right.
and we need every hand on deck for it. So thank you both so much. I apologize for all the little. I apologize for all the technical difficulties, and a lot of folks are commenting. Thank you. A lot of Que Dios lo bendiga, which means may God bless you both.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
so
Thank you for having me.
yeah,
Keep the fight on. Bye-bye.
of course.